I want to begin by saying to all of you that, look around yourself and ask yourselves the question. Let me in fact ask this to you, very simple question. What is our religion? Islam, right? I am talking to the vast majority of you, and probably all of you, like to believe, or at least, have known this, that Islam is your religion. Islam at the end of the day is a worldview. It's a philosophy. It's something that tells you, start to end, that आपको अपनी ज़िंदगी कैसे गुजारनी है, right? One of the biggest problems today is this, that when we think of Islam at a practical, pragmatic level to be nothing but a set of rituals. So the best of us actually, when we start thinking of being more Islamic, whatever that means, the first notion is namaz, roza, hajj, agar bahut guna the, okay? Or whatever it is. And alhamdulillah, all of these are part of our deen. But I really want you to think about this, that what about the fact that materialism is also a religion by that definition? Materialism is also a worldview, a religion, a lifestyle. And let's admit that we are all deeply impacted by this religion. Every one of us over here has fallen many times, right, in front of materialism. We've sort of chosen to live lives that are extremely materialistic. And the bigger one, capitalism. We live in a capitalistic system. One of my friends, we have friends here from the Islamic banks, one of our professors at LUMS told us that, Islamic banking, should be renamed to being called as Western Capitalist Halal Banking, right? And I mean, it will still be halal if you ask me, right? Mufti Akhlaq is the better sort of expert at that, but that's essentially another thing which impacts us, right? Because us dunya mein hum reh rahe hain, us race mein hum sab involved hain. And lastly, consumerism, right? The whole consumeristic culture that we're impacted by. What is the issue? We love, willing to believe that we are all Muslims, we live by Islam, but Islam at the end of the day, masjid ke 10 minute tak hota hai, किसी के निकाह पर होता है, किसी के मरने पर होता है. रियलिस्टिकली, प्रैग्मेटिकली स्पीकिंग, हमारी ज़िंदगियाँ, हमारे गोल्स, हमारी हर चीज़ डिफाइंड है इन बाकी 3 वर्ल्ड व्यूज़ से. एंड दीज वर्ल्ड व्यूज़ अ लॉट ऑफ टाइम्स become so strong that they dominate the religion that essentially we claim that we come from. And that's one of the biggest problems in terms of what you find the youth and the young working professionals that I'm speaking to today have. And जब तक आप इसको grassroots level पे नहीं resolve करेंगे ना, ये ठीक नहीं होगा. I would like to believe that Mufti Akhlaq in his presentation will inshallah speak about what is the worldview that Islam gives to you about wealth, right? So that's the second part of the presentation. So the world that we live in right now, what is happening and how are we impacted by it? So the first thing that you see is, there is a tremendous impact that social status and success has on us. So मैं आपके सामने एक मिसाल रखता हूँ. That let's go back to the time of the Sahaba Karam radiyallahu anhu ajmain. And I will name somebody that you've all grown up revering. And that is the man that we call as Ali ibn Abi Talib. If Sayyidina Ali was to come here today, if he was to be amongst us, let me tell you something, the vast majority of us would not even recognize him. Not recognize him in the sense that he is perhaps the poorest amongst the Sahaba. Somebody who does not have enough wealth his entire life to even give zakat. Somebody who actually, for most part of his life, does not have enough money for the evening to feed Hassan and Hussein. Somebody who by profession was nothing but a laborer. जिनके कपड़ों पे पता नहीं कितने पैबंद लगे हुए हैं. And I'm not saying we all have to do that. But my question to you is this, that it's not the economic status or the account balance of Sayyidina Ali that is bothering me. It is the fact that every time you read about Sayyidina Ali, what comes to your head? The picture of a poor man, which I just created, or a man who was defined by shuja'at, bravery, courage, ilm, character. So first questions, guys, that when we think of the world today and when we think of ourselves and the people around us, does it impact you when you see somebody walk into a bigger car, wearing branded clothes? अगर आपको रिलेटेबल नहीं हो रहा, तो जब आप रिश्ता करने जाते हैं तो आप किरदार को पहले देखते हैं या घर के साइज़ को देखते हैं? कि 2 कनाल है या 1.5 कनाल है, गाड़ियों में पोर्च कौन कौन सी खड़ी है, इकोनॉमिक स्टेटस क्या है क्या नहीं है. Every single one of us essentially has gotten parameters which are radically different. हम तो we are so colonized actually. If somebody can speak in English, there you go, that's it, वो पढ़ा लिखा है, right? And this is something that impacts your worldview. This is something that it depends on how you look at things. And there has to be a realignment over here. Second is, you know, how materialism and consumer culture impacts us. Can I ask you something? All of you know electric cars? Yes? What brands of electric cars do we have? Right now in Pakistan, what brands do we have? BYD? Audi or Kia, BMW, Nepal, MG, right? अभी रिसेंटली कुछ हुआ है इलेक्ट्रिक कार्स के सिलसिले में? क्या हुआ है? ऑटो शो हुए हैं, बहुत सारी गाड़ियां लॉन्च हुई हैं, राइट? एक सिंपल सा सवाल है, बुरा नहीं मनाना. आपको ये सारा कुछ क्यों पता है आपके पास 1.5 करोड़ रुपए है? 1.5 करोड़ रुपए मैं नहीं मांगूंगा एंड पे चंदा, डोंट वरी. आधी कुछ शक्लों को मैं जानता हूँ, ठीक है ना. 1.5 करोड़ तो बड़ी दूर की बात है, ठीक है. द प्रॉफेट सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम said in a hadith, min husn al-islam al-mari tarkuhu ma la yani. The beauty of a person's Islam lies in leaving that which does not concern him. कि वो छोड़ देता है उस चीज़ को जिससे उसका ताल्लुक नहीं है. Every one of us knows कि BYD ने कौन कौन सी गाड़ियाँ लॉन्च की हैं. We watched the Sunil Munns and the others and the back wheels, and we sort of, and you know, the reality is you don't even have 10% of that money, some of us. I'm not saying it's haram to buy any of that, ठीक है, electric भी हम अगले हफ्ते, ठीक है, but I'm just saying that is what this does to you. It essentially produces a desire for more, and a lot of times it's irrelevant. A lot of times it's coming at a cost of something that you don't realize. Right? What is that cost? We'll get to that in the presentation. That's the second problem that we have. I just used the cars example. We could talk about many other things in that. Right? The third one, that we prioritize our careers over personal lives. You know, this notion of glamorizing people who are successful in their career. What is the obsession with that? ये फलाने बैंक का वाइस प्रेसिडेंट है, ये फलाने उसका जो है ना CEO है, ये इसका है, ये जो है ना ग्लोबल उसके ऑपरेशंस को देख रहा है. ग्रेट, अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह. You know, it shows that you worked hard on a dunyavi skill, but was that something that had to be revered in of itself? Was that something that had to be revered? You have to ask yourself in the law, because we're doing everything Islamically, right? Do you think you will take that status of yours in the grave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that day? Do you think you would take it? But you know, we all tend to do that. And by the way, because a lot of you are older, mashallah, the problem is we raise our kids with similar values. We raise our kids pushing them to the narrative कि कामयाबी जो है ना वो इधर लाई कर रही होती है, यही परसू करना है, इसी सब को जो है क्या कहते हैं देखना है. And that in of itself essentially at the end of the day is a loss. My father once took me to meet somebody, extended उसमें, we were in Dubai. So and अम्मा ने बहुत तारीफ की कि you know, you have to meet this guy, he's so successful, self-made, this and that. And I mean, fair enough, ठीक है, नहीं जैसे होता है ये नहीं. So I met him and बहुत अच्छे आदमी थे. He started, so अब्बा ने उनको कहा जी आप इनको भी अपनी success story सुनाएं. This guy started with a very humble sort of a background. वो पता नहीं सऊदी में कोई बिल्कुल 1000 रियाल की नौकरी से शुरू किया है ना, आज एक बहुत बड़ी कंपनी के मालिक थे, done really well for himself. And he said to me, in the middle of that conversation, that you know, in these 18 years, right, मेरी 3 बेटियां कैसे बड़ी हुई हैं, किधर थीं, क्या कर रही थीं, मुझे कुछ भी नहीं पता. And here I said, this man is an absolute failure from my perspective. Because you know, a lot of us as fathers are nothing but ATM machines. And that's a choice we made. And that's not a choice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted us to make. And it's about going back and thinking about it, that really are these the most important things for us in one sense or the other? Is that the case? Right? And the last one is the comparative sort of world. For the younger generation, it's on social media. For the others, it's otherwise as well. Right? कि जो एक notion exist कर रहा होता है ना कि जहाँ हम essentially अपनी वर्थ को तबाह कर देते हैं दूसरों से कंपेयर करके. Now the problem with social media actually is this, कि it's reality that's not real. Instagram is reality because everybody on Instagram is real. असल लोग हैं, अपनी ज़िंदगी के असल moments portray कर रहे हैं, but when you look at it collectively, that's not how people live. Right? Because everybody is just posing their best things up there. They're just posting their best things up there. And when you're sitting in isolation looking at things, right, it just, puts you in a matter where you start thinking कि यार लोगों के पास क्या क्या है, वो क्या क्या कर रहे हैं, कैसे कर रहे हैं, मैं कुछ भी नहीं कर पा रहा. Historically, that had never happened. And tell you this because I'm mostly at the university, कितने बच्चे बच्चियाँ इस बात पे suicidal हो जाते हैं. We now have girls in Pakistan, women in Pakistan, 16, 17, 15 जो colleges में जा रही हैं, who are basically willing to do any and everything to their body to look like somebody across the continent जिसको उसने movie में या Instagram पे देखा है. And in that process they ruin everything. For most of us actually, we're trying to live the same, it used to be the American dream. That's what a lot of us are doing. So that's the world that we're living in, guys, right? All of these factors essentially किसी ना किसी हद तक हमारी understanding of wealth को एक narrative की तरफ push कर रहे होते हैं. And the first thing is to be cognizant of it. That's why we are here. देखो Allah says in the Quran فَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. It's a reminder that this is a deep problem. And अगर आप इस problem को ठीक नहीं करेंगे ना, मैं frankly आपको कह रहा हूँ, आप 5 वक्त नमाजी बन जाएं, इबादत करते रहें, but at the end of the day the दुनिया will get to you. Shaitan will attack us in a manner that we don't realize. So we have to come out of these webs, we have to come out of these places जो हमें एक, because ये हमारी identity को एक अलग world view, एक अलग spin देती हैं. Because अगर आप इन चीज़ों से validation सीख करेंगे, तो फिर आप इस्लाम को साथ नहीं ले चल सकेंगे. You'll be able to do the ritual part of Islam, I said so already. But आप effectively जो complete picture है उसको नहीं कर सकोगे. Now it does another thing to you as well, because this is the world we live in. There's a cost that you all pay. The first of that is it promotes a culture of debt. It promotes a culture of debt. The best example that comes to my mind is Pakistani weddings. So many of you, and I can see some fathers, mashallah, at weddings, we get out of our pants. Just in trying to be somebody or to match some other wedding or some family pressure, people essentially end up being in debts. And it comes at such a ajeeb cost कि we don't realize कि इसकी वजह से लोग साला साल जो है ना कुछ कर नहीं सकते. And that's something that Allah Ta'ala wanted you to be liberated off of this. God did not want us to be there. Right? आप उर्दू में एक मुहावरा सुना होगा आपने, चादर देख कर पाँव फैलाओ. बट वो चादर तो गायब कर दी गई है ना कहीं, राइट? और ये इसेंशियली आपको पुश किया जा रहा है इस चीज़ की तरफ. एंड दैट्स प्रॉब्लमैटिक. The year that I was in Warwick, one of the courses that I took with one of my German professors, Lena Wessel, there was an article she gave to us, very interesting. And I'll just say to you, just to sort of, the article stated that, money has a sister. Money, पैसा, इसकी एक बहन होती है. That sister is called debt. Right? And they said that sister is essentially the bad character girl. And the article stated that's the prostitute. Because it lures you into yourself. And you don't realize while you take debt कि इसके एंड पे मौत है. Excessive debt. Obviously, कर्जा तो हमारा दीन भी कर्ज़े हसना की बात करता है. A lot of us essentially fall for this. Because there is a culture of debt. पाकिस्तान में अभी भी कम है. आप England, America जाएं, the year that I was in the UK, I met so many people who were stuck in debt. यानी उनके घर में literally जैसे कहते हैं ना, बाथरूम की चप्पल से लेके घर तक सब जो है ना mortgage हुआ. Everything is on lease. So the guy absolutely owns nothing. जो लिबास भी शायद पहना mortgage. ठीक है? And banks are not good people. Yeah, I mean, banks are not organizations that are there to help you, if you were to ask me. ठीक है, मैं इस्लाम में कोई दूसरे की तफरीक नहीं करूँगा, but you're all sort of sane enough to understand this part. Second, what it does is this, you start prioritizing wealth over ethics, over your values. पैसे की खातिर हम हर चीज़ गिव अप कर देते हैं. यहाँ से प्रॉब्लम शुरू होती है. फॉर द सेक ऑफ मनी ना हलाल देखते हैं ना हराम देखते हैं, आखिरत गई। ना ये देखते हैं कि कोई राजी हो रहा है, नाराज हो गया है क्या, ठीक है, भाई भाई से लड़ता है, हर चीज दबा होती है। एंड you know the problem in that is this कि what you don't realize, a lot of us right now, and I stand here guilty as well, by the way, none of this is about the fact कि मैं ठीक हूँ और आप हो, we are all here to remind ourselves, right? We are all enslaved by our jobs, by our businesses, by our क्या कहते हैं family pressures in that sense। जिम्मेदारी एक अलग चीज है। That enslavement, like it or not, pushes us in manners that we don't realize। So अगर मैं आज किसी को कहूँ ना, giving this example कि यार you know there is a course for deen, like a course that you agree on कि ये मुझे करना चाहिए as a Muslim, number one common excuse is मेरे पास time नहीं, because you're asking 2 hours a day for 3 days a week, this is too much, you know मेरी तो late sittings होती हैं, ये होता है, फलाना होता है, ये होता है, ठीक है, that's how we are, and what you were saying is true, but guess what, if I offered you a side job with the right amount of money, every one of us would make time in our schedule, every one of us। मैं खुद सबसे पहले लाइन में खड़ा हूँगा। So you know we had a professor at LUMS back in the day, Dr. Farzad, he was a true social scientist, and he would say he would teach the MBAs back then, तो ये undergrad में ना एक क्लास लेने आए थे, ठीक है, and he would say a very crude thing, and I say it no issues, ठीक है, he would say, and no offense, he would say the only difference between you guys, any the business people, and a prostitute is this, that you are willing to take any position as long as the price is right. And that's the sad reality. We are willing to do any and everything for money today. बस हर बंदे की अपनी वर्थ है जिसमें वो खरीदा जा सकता है। And I swear the Sahaba Karam were never like that. They could not be bought for any money, and we have enough examples in history, right? And that is where the true Sunnah of the Prophet lies today. So when you prioritize wealth over ethics, the deen to hai sara ethics. That's the second issue. Third, and this is, you know, the older ones are gone by, okay, is that your education and career choices then are all about economics. आपने सुना है कि एक बच्चा कहता है कि यार मैंने फिलॉसफी पढ़नी है, एंड माँ बाप उसको कह रहे हैं पढ़ तो लोगे, कमाओगे कहाँ से। अब तो फिर थोड़ा सा, क्योंकि पाकिस्तान में 2-3 ही प्रोफेशन होते थे, डॉक्टर, इंजीनियर, बड़ी हद होगी लॉयर, राइट। प्रॉब्लम ये है कि इन दैट परसूट अल्लाह सुब्हानहू व तआला ने हर शख्स को मुख्तलिफ सलाहियतें दी, मुख्तलिफ पैशंस दी। आप मुझे एक बात बताना, इस कमरे में कितने सारे लोग बैठे हुए, सम माइट हैव बीन फॉर्चुनेट बिकॉज आई वाज नॉट, ठीक है, when you were selecting your career, were you thinking about it from the perspective of global impact, from the perspective of giving back to the community, for the perspective of, you know, doing something for the deen, right, really causing a change, education में, healthcare में, you know, politics में, governance में? Why? Because सर पे क्या सवार था? पैसा। That's it. सर पे पैसा सवार था। हमारे पढ़े लिखे लोगों में अक्सर, you know, a lot of women will have to hear, अगर कोई बच्चियां कहते हैं ना हमारी कि जी मैंने मास्टर्स करना है उसके बाद, तो स्टैंडर्ड पाकिस्तानी फादर रिस्पॉन्स है कि पढ़ के क्या करना है, तुम्हारी तो शादी करा देनी है। That's how we place education, and that's problematic in its own accord. That's फिर हमारे पास thinkers पैदा नहीं होते, हमारे पास नेशन बिल्डिंग नहीं होती, and that's the cost that we are paying। हर चीज पैसे से टाइड है। And lastly, your own identity is tied to wealth. Most of us have an extremely materialistic, plastic identity. Most of us have a very materialistic, plastic identity. And you know, it's a sad world, by the way. It's a sad world, right? क्यों? क्योंकि essentially in the process what we don't realize is that who are we in the first place, right? You know, मैं आपसे पूछूं ना आप कौन हैं, तो you'll give me every answer। मैं ये हूँ, मेरी ये प्रोफाइल है, ये है, ख़ानदान भी बता देंगे, नस्ल भी बता देंगे, ज़ात भी बता देंगे, नेबरहुड भी बता देंगे, दोस्तों के हवाले भी दे देंगे, बट वो आइडेंटिटी जो अल्लाह सुब्हानहू व तआला ने हमें कुरान में बताई है, वो कोई लास्ट पे भी नहीं आती, वो लास्ट पे भी नहीं आती। तो ये प्रॉब्लम वर्ल्ड व्यू का है। दिस इज़ अ कॉस्ट दैट वी आर पेइंग। And every kid is being raised in this manner where he's sort of, born in a culture of debt and all of these things, right? So it's a complicated web, essentially, that you're looking at. Whatever I've sort of said, अब आप सोचो कि इसके दरमियान रहकर truly Islamic identity or conception of wealth को लेना कितना मुश्किल है. Because when there is so many things influencing you, you will be influenced, right? And there has to be something that changes that. There has to be some effort. And the first step is to recognize कि यार ये सारा कुछ है और इसलिए जो है ना मुझे वो करना है. यानी छोटी छोटी बातें होती हैं. One of our professors at LUMS who taught us Islamic banking, I was an accounting and finance major, तो end of the degree आके ना Islamic banking पढ़ा दी. अब Islamic banking ठीक है नहीं है कितनी % ठीक है पैसा लग गया, ये वाजे हो गया कि यार सूद का तो सीन ही कोई नहीं. People forget कि सूद के बारे में तो अल्लाह ने वाजे कर दी हैं चीज़ें. अच्छा 4 साल अब टोटल मेहनत ये की थी कि कैसे जाके सूद कमाना है, लोगों को भी कमा के देना है. तो he said to us a beautiful thing, मुझे आज भी याद है. He said you have to remember when you were a Muslim, तो हम रेशियोज पढ़ते हैं ना ROI और वो सारा कुछ. He said मुसलमान के लिए एक रेशियो होती है COBM. There is a ratio that Muslims have which is COBM, right? That's called cost of being a Muslim. Yeah. And that concept stayed with me for the years to come. That there would be opportunities that would be paying well, that would have the right amount of offers, it would offer me a successful दुनियावी career, but COBM मुझे कह रहा है कि ये हराम है, इसमें सुकून नहीं. It goes against my family values, it goes against my routine, it goes against the Quran. I have to give it up. And that's something that we have to recognize that there is a cost of being a Muslim. And that cost is rewarded and compensated, by the way, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the dunya, मैं तो कहता हूँ दुनिया में भी अल्लाह देते हैं और आखिरत में भी देते हैं. We just have to be patient, right? So that's the first thing. Now, the second part of my presentation is this, that we have to sort of ask ourselves that what is at the center of your life. So क्या मतलब है? देखो, our life sort of consists of these things. There is a social aspect to our life. Education is part of our life. It's an ongoing process. There's work, there's deen, there is well-being, there is family. ठीक है? तो ये सारे का सारा कुछ जो है ना हमारा पर्पस डिटरमिन करता है. हमारा पर्पस डिटरमिन करता है कि essentially, can you guys hear me at the back properly or no? इसको आप टेस्ट कर लो. I can be loud enough. Can you still hear me at the back? Yes. I won't use it now. I'll go without the mic. या सो हमारा पर्पस डिटरमिन करता है कि हम जो है ना इन सर्कल्स को जो इर्द गिर्द है वो कितनी इंपॉर्टेंस, कितनी वेटेज दे रहे होते हैं, राइट? सो लेट मी शो यू 2 वर्ल्ड व्यूज. द फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड व्यू एसेंशियली हैज वेल्थ एट द सेंटर ऑफ इट. यानी मेरी जिंदगी का मकसद पैसा है. अगर मेरी जिंदगी का मकसद पैसा है ना, वर्क एंड करियर इज द बिगेस्ट सर्कल. The vast majority or time of my life is spent worrying and doing fikr about वो. And education क्यों बढ़ा है? Not because हम पढ़ना चाहते हैं, because in the day and age that we live in, we all know essentially कि इसके ज़रिए से ये linked. And मैं आपको बताता हूँ उसकी extreme क्या होती है कि then people essentially when they move to these two things, वो even अपनी social life जो है ना वो इसके साथ link कर देते हैं. उन लोगों के साथ उठना बैठना है जो पैसे वाले हैं, जो कारोबार में जो है ना आपको फ़ायदा दे सकते हैं, जो आपका क्लाइंट बन सकते हैं, इसको कर सकते हैं. हत्ता कि उसका इम्पैक्ट आपकी फैमिली पे यहाँ तक आता है. एंड यू नो दिस बेटर देन आई डू कि बच्चों की शादी उन घरों में करनी है जो हमारे सोशल स्टेटस को पुश करें. 2 कारोबारी बाप फैसला कर लेते हैं कि हमारा बच्चा और आपकी बेटी जो है ना उनका रिश्ता हो जाएगा. बच्चा BNU में पहले ही दिल दे आया था, ठीक है, अब बेड़ा गर्क अलग हो जाता है. सो इसेंशियली दैट्स व्हाट इट डज. And you have to just be sane enough to understand it's an imbalanced life. And guys, I mean, we are all actually pushing towards this. We are all actually pushing towards this. कि क्या करना है क्या नहीं करना है. एक conundrum इस मुल्क में मैं मिसाल देता हूँ क्या होता है कि जी बच्चे को जब एजुकेशन सिस्टम में डालना है, you have 2 models right now, 3 I would say. Homeschooling is one that's very unique. Islamic school versus conventional school. I've heard all the debates. Islamic school ऐसे होते हैं वैसे होते हैं, and I agree. But the problem is आप अपने बच्चे को बनाना क्या चाहते हैं? You all have to answer this. How do you want to see your kid raised? So similarly, आप अपने लिए क्या करना चाहते हैं उसका impact जो है ना वो है. And ये balance कब हो सकता है essentially? Very simply. when you have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the center of everything. If your worldview is Allah-centric, Quran-centric, then the Quran will define for you, and that's what Mufti Akhlaq will inshallah do, right? Ki how are you going to balance this, right? And the vast majority of us actually fail at this level because हमारा मकसद अल्लाह ताला की रज़ा है. ये जुमला हम सुन तो लेते हैं, कह भी देते हैं, बट आपको और मुझे पता है कि प्रैक्टिकली हमारी ज़िंदगियों से ख़त्म हो चुकी हुई है बात. वो रज़ा जो है मैक्सिमम प्रैक्टिसिंग मुसलमानों के लिए इसेंशियली बस चंद इबादात तक tied down, right? So what does research give to you? Just a couple of things actually. The first is, you know, the idea of a hedonic treadmill. इसका philosophy या understanding basically क्या है कि जब आप दुनिया को pursue कर रहे होते हो ना, तो होता पता है क्या है कि हम सब की desires हैं, हम सब की wants हैं, हम उस desire के पीछे भागते हैं. वो desire ही हो सकती है मेरे पास ऐसी गाड़ी हो, जायज़ चीज़ है, ठीक है. जब मुझे वो चीज़ मिल जाती है ना, ठीक है, तो बहुत जल्दी उसकी जो satisfaction या खुशी है वो ख़त्म हो जाती है, ठीक है. It's not like you buy a new phone, you talk about it for the rest of your life, ठीक है. 2 हफ्ते बाद उससे बेहतर आ जाता है तो आप भूल भी जाते हैं actually, right? But in the pursuit of that, what happens is this: you're on a treadmill, and you know a treadmill actually never has a destination. You keep running, and you never come to an end. And you know what is the end? It's a sad, lonely death, which is devoid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I often say that तुम दुनिया की pursuit में पागलों की तरह भागते रहोगे ना, सबसे आगे पहुंच जाओगे. If you are good at it, you will actually be the most successful. And by the way, Muslims should be the most successful. You should earn, you should have brilliant careers. But what is the purpose? If it is that self-centered, selfish, hedonistic life, आप रेस में सबसे आगे पहुंच जाएंगे, but पता है होगा क्या? अल्लाह ताला फिनिश लाइन गायब कर देते हैं. And बस फिर आप जानवरों की तरह भागते रहते हैं. If you don't believe me, haven't you been amazed at our politicians and the bureaucrats and the establishment? कि कितना कमाना है यार इन्होंने. You know, we've all said these things कि कितना कमाना चाहते हैं ये, कि यानी इनको मुल्क की गुर्बत पे भी शर्म नहीं आ रही. What do you think is? Don't you think उनको ये बात नहीं समझ आ रही? It's actually, if you ask me, and I don't want to be personal to anybody, ये अल्लाह का अजाब है. In a sense, it's a punishment of God that some of them will never get to repent because उनकी जो दुनिया की हिर्स है ना, वो उनके इस पॉइंट तक पहुंचा चुकी. And we are no different in one sense. We are following the same track, सिर्फ हमें opportunity कम मिली. So that's for the first part of it. The second of it is essentially, you know, the concept of relative income. And that's, you know, because all of you work in organizations, year end, you know, you have something that we call as appraisals. HR आपको एक promotion देता है, percentages पता होती हैं, ठीक है. So, you know, I got an appraisal of, let's say, 15%, 50,000. और मैं बहुत राजी हूँ because मैं तवक्को ही नहीं कर रहा था. And then I find out कि मेरे साथ वाले को 60 मिली. Everybody's been there. Everybody's been there. अभी हम वो समर में जो है ना, हमने टर्की जाना था for a conference. It's a fairly expensive conference. $3500 की सिर्फ फीस थी. $3,500 in Pakistan. You had to give in an application, be selected. तो I sort of applied for it. बड़ा लंबा चौड़े forms ऐसे सब कुछ किया. And they had said that we'll give scholarships to people from third world countries. वो तो हमें तो पता था कि हम चंदे पे पाकिस्तानी सबसे आगे होते हैं, मौलवी हो तो डबल हो जाता है, ठीक है. So basically I made Moin apply, ठीक है. And so they sent Moin को मेरे से, Moin is the other person who sort of at Naseeha with me. Moin को मेरे से पहले ऑफर आ गई. And they gave him an extra scholarship of quite a lot. तो उसकी जो net fees रह गई ना $3500 में से, वो $1250 थी. It was fairly good, like more than 50%, ठीक है. अच्छा, फॉर्म में किसी जगह नहीं पूछा हुआ था कि आपके पास कितने पैसे हैं, स्टेटमेंट लगाएं, कुछ भी नहीं था. फॉर्म सिर्फ जेनेरिक था. तो आई डोंट नो हाउ दे वर डिसाइडेड. मेरा डिसीजन 2 हफ्ते बाद आया एंड मुझे उन्होंने कहा कि आपने $2000 देंगे. मेरा कुल गम ये था कि इस घटिया इंसान को $750 क्यों मिल रहा है, ठीक है. लाइक मेरी टोटल ऑब्सेशन ही थी. एंड आई एम टेलिंग यू, आई वांटेड कि अगर मेरी काम करे ना करे, इसकी तो बड़ा मेरे बराबर करे ना, ठीक है, सारा कुछ ठीक हो जाएगा. आई रोट एन ईमेल टू देम कि जी आप मुझे कम करें, वो करें, मुझे पता आपने उन लोगों के दिए, वो $250 कम किए, फिर भी पूरे कम नहीं किए, ठीक है. दैट्स हाउ वी ऑल फंक्शन. एंड यू नो दैट्स अ रेस यू हैव टू पुल योर आउटसाइड. और ये मैं किसकी बात करूं? समबडी हु इज लाइक अ ब्रदर टू मी. और हम जा भी अल्लाह की खातिर रहे. बिकॉज पता है पर्सपेक्टिव क्या? समबडी सेड टू मी, ही सेड टू मी, व्हाई आर यू गोइंग? अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला. हु आर यू स्पेंडिंग दिस मनी फॉर? अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला. अगर आप रिलीजियस कॉन्फ्रेंस पे जा रहे होते, ठीक है, हु इज गोइंग टू गिव यू द रिटर्न? अल्लाह सुब्हानहू तआला. तो shouldn't you be happy कि तुम अल्लाह के लिए जो है ना ज़्यादा खर्च रहे हो? I still wish they would have given me more, but so that's how we all are, right? So that's what he's saying essentially कि ये relative income आपको कभी ये comparative notion खत्म करना है अपनी जिंदगी से, अपनी उसमें जो है ना खुश रहना है, दूसरे की खुशी में खुश होना सीखना है. The third thing is effective forecasting, which is what people tend to overestimate the fact कि दुनिया की कोई चीज, कोई material success आपको कितनी खुशी देगा. क्या मतलब है कि all of us, for example, इस कमरे में हर एक के पास एक सवारी है, ठीक है, या चलो कुछ के पास है वो भी ना हो, किसी के पास बाइक है, किसी के पास एक तरह की गाड़ी है. You ask people what is your ideal, किसी को Mercedes, but that ideal is far away from you, like 10 times away from your wealth. But you are thinking यार अगर मेरे पास ये आ जाए ना, अगर मेरे पास DHA में अपना घर आ जाए, अगर मेरे पास ये चीज आ जाए, बस that will be the end of it. Guess what, वो आ जाता है, ठीक है, in a matter of time for a lot of people वो आ जाता है. इससे पहले भी वो चीजें आई हैं, and you were thinking कि सब सेट हो जाएगा, and it never happened. And we continue then deluding ourselves into more. It's almost like a drug. The drugs that people do today. When people take drugs, you ask the youth, आप क्यों drugs लेते हो? लोग drugs इसलिए नहीं लेते कि हमने अल्लाह की नाफरमानी करनी है. लोग drugs इसलिए लेते हैं because somebody makes them believe कि इससे तुम्हारी परेशानी खत्म हो जाएगी, इससे तुम distract हो जाओगे, and they take it, thinking कि ये हो रहा है, and they keep getting deeper into it. Ecstasy, marijuana, heroin, right? All of these things that are down there, right? And they never come out of it. So, the notion is in front of you. We're actually drugged by the jaiz halal things of the dunya. We can have more and more and more, and it will never come to a stop. So again, the purpose, how do you fix this, right? You have to do something about it at one sense or the other. And that's essentially what we're going to talk about today in the next half of the presentation. The last thing is this, that guys, that the negative impact of this is significant. What does it do to you? Stress and anxiety. This, ये अकेली इतनी चीज़ है, ये आपकी ज़िंदगी ख़त्म कर सकती है. मैं आपको एक मिसाल देता हूँ, ये हर दिन नहीं होता, but this is, we're living in a world of cryptocurrency, NFTs. फतवा मुफ्ती साहब से ले लें, ठीक है, दोनों तरफ के मिल जाएंगे, मैं वो नहीं दे रहा, ठीक है. मैं हमेशा ना, when people ask me, I tell them कि यार नॉर्थ अमेरिकन काउंसिल ने ये कह दिया, पाकिस्तानी उलमा इसके साथ कह रहे हैं, वो आपको बेहतरीन पता है, यूट्यूब भी सर्च कर लें. मैं सिर्फ आपको एक बात बताऊँ, क्रिप्टो, ठीक है, you're looking at the success stories, फलाना बंदा अमीर हो गया, ये हो गया, वो गया, the future might be crypto as well, ठीक है. The whole notion of crypto, if you ask me, and there is research on that as well, has actually made people less happier. But I'll give you one. My brother-in-law is based in Australia, ठीक है, so this I heard from him. And पीछे ना crypto boom कर रही थी, कई साल पुरानी बात है. He said some of us as friends, we put money into crypto, we got crazy, and we loved it. किसको बुरा नहीं लगता. He said then 2 of my friends who had been in Australia for about more than a decade or so, they essentially put up everything they had in crypto, to the extent कि उनका जो घर था ना, उन्होंने वो गिरवी रखवा के कर दिया, and the market crashed. And guess what happened? Both of them, average Pakistani people, हमारे तरह के लोग जो वहाँ गए हुए थे, ठीक है, ended up committing suicide. I don't think they could have foreseen कि हम ये करेंगे. But that's excessive. But my problem is what? What about the kids who were orphaned because they committed suicide? What about the women who were widowed? What about the mother and father of those kids? And you can't blame anybody but yourself. We all tend to do that. We all sort of are doing that self-harm to ourselves. Second thing, ethical compromises. What does that mean? We don't have any value. आपको पता है आज मैं और आप, हम किसी क्या कहें, हम रिश्वत, धोखा, हर चीज करने को तैयार हो जाते हैं. And we even find a mufti for it, by the way. Sadly speaking. एक दूसरी ऊपर से हम उसको लेजिटिमाइज भी करने की कोशिश करते हैं. At times मजबूर हो जाता है इंसान, बिल्कुल वो फतवा आपको पता होना चाहिए, बट उसके साथ यानी तकब्बुर होना चाहिए या इस्तिग़फ़ार होना चाहिए. So we don't have any ethics essentially in this country. And that's the problem. Third thing, broken relationships. भाई भाई का कत्ल कर रहा है इस मुल्क में, over property, over मीरास, over the fact कि किसका क्या है और क्या नहीं है. Islam did not come down to bring this to us. Islam sort of spoke about a very different set of values, right? And you essentially, if you don't have relationships, right, that are right, family values, you can't have happiness in your life. Increased greed and dissatisfaction. तो क्या होता है कि आपकी ज़िंदगी में सुकून ख़त्म हो जाता है। इतनी लालच पैदा हो जाती है कि कुछ भी हमें समझ नज़र किसी पैराडाइम से नहीं आ रहा होता, इतना हम पागलों की तरह भाग रहे होते हैं इन चीज़ों के पीछे। There's no loss, there's no purpose in our life. You just lose purpose in that entire notion. You just lose purpose. And you know, it's a very severe thing. कि आप क्या कर रहे हो, किस लिए कर रहे हो, किसको देख रहे हो? You had a need, you pursued something, but it should have been done in context. Yeah. And you know, some things are more important. I'll give you my own personal example just to set this right. My parents left Pakistan when I was at the start of my A-levels. My father's tremendously worked hard. That's why I am what I am. So I give him all the credit. Now this has been about 15-20 years, right? He's doing fairly well for himself. कोई issue नहीं है किसी भी एतबार से financially. बच्चे उनके 2 ही बेटे हैं, settled हैं, सब कुछ है. For the past few years, I keep telling my mom and dad, please come back, right? And Amma says to me that I want to come back. मैं अकेली हो गई हूँ, I miss your kids because there's fun over here, सब कुछ है, अपने घर है, हर चीज़ है अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह अल्लाह की तरफ से, ठीक है? And my father is not willing to, not because of anything, but just one thing. And I keep telling him, I said, अब्बा अगर आप दुबई बैठे 80 से मल्टीप्लाई करते रहेंगे ना इसको, आप कभी वापस नहीं आ सकेंगे. And I often ask him, and very sweetly, I say, आप किसके लिए कमा रहे हैं मुझे ये बता दें. How many more plots, files or things will you buy जिसको आप visit भी नहीं कर सकोगे? You're about 65 now. I mean, the Prophet left this world at 63. What are you doing? And he just says, यार बेटे 1 साल और दे दो. And essentially it's a trap. And I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying this is how we all are at the end of the day. And that's, the whole, कि मेरा मकसद क्या ये था सर. And मैं तो कभी कभी अम्मा अब्बा को बड़े प्यार से और कह रहा हूँ कि and I fear that. I say, I fear the fact कि आप 2 गए थे, आप 1 ना वापस आए. Yeah. I want both of you to come back. I want कि आखिरी कुछ साल में आपके साथ गुजारूं. कि पहले किसने जाने? But I'm saying this, guys, because you have families. Decide today what is important. Right? What is important? And the most important thing, that if the spiritual disconnect means, what if it all comes at the cost of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Yeah. If it comes at the cost of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, तो फिर आप क्या करेंगे? Because a lot of us do that. कि हम अल्लाह को essentially we sell God off, our relationship with God off, for the sake of a salary, a wealth statement, a plot, a car. Was that why the Prophet left us? Was that why he prayed for us every night? If he was to come here today, and meet you, would we be able to present to him what we've been doing? You tell me, would we be able to do that? Sheikh Omar in Turkey made us do an exercise. He said, write a letter to the Prophet. And I've done this before as well. Write a letter to the Prophet right now and tell him what you have been doing for the purpose and the maqsad that he left for you. What would you write? क्या लिखेंगे, क्या बताएंगे उन्हें कि मैं सिटी बैंक का ग्लोबल रिस्क मैनेजर था और मैंने इतनी ब्रांचेस मेरे अंडर थी और उससे मैंने इतने लोगों को सूद दिया और उनकी ज़िंदगी बर्बाद की, या मैं फलानी कंपनी का ये था. What would we write to the Prophet? These are questions that are going to come. And these questions transcend firqas and schools of thought and mazhabs. These are questions that every scholar, every rational person who's gone through the Quran will tell you about. And we have to reflect, right? Where are we headed? In the last 5 minutes that I have, 40 minutes ho gaye na, So, it's just the idea that we have to understand what is the role of money in society, right? So, Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah ta'ala kya karte the, that money is such a friend of yours which benefits you only when it leaves you. Allahu Akbar. And this is marifat, right? कि पैसा जो है वो आपका वो दोस्त है जो आपको तब नफ़ा देता है जब वो चला जाता है. right? And ये सहाबा की खूबसूरती थी कि वो माल खर्च कर कर खुश होते थे. Yeah, they would be willing to give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why can't we give, by the way? It's only one simple reason. Because we don't have muhabbat. If there is anybody that you love, कोई अगर आपने, so think of anybody that you love. बल्कि चलो I'll give the example that I often give. ठीक है, आहद से बैठा हुआ है, right? He asks me कि क्लास के बाद कि सर वो आपने पैसों पे बात तो की है, just 5 minutes. हाँ, okay. If there's anybody that, so आज मुझे कहता है सर मुझे 1000 रुपये देते, मैं दे देता हूँ शर्मा शर्मी, राइट, कहता मैं अगले हफ्ते दूंगा, एंड आई डोंट, अगले हफ्ते हजरत गायब है, आ ही नहीं रहे, पैसे ही नहीं दे रहे, तो मैं पूछता भी हूँ एक दो दफ़ा, स्टैंडर्ड पाकिस्तानी हरकतें, ठीक है, ये हो गया वो हो गया, तो आई वोंट लाइक इट. द इंटरेस्टिंग पार्ट इज़ कि 1000 रुपये मेरे वॉलेट में कम हो जाए तो शायद मुझे पता भी ना चले, and it would not matter to me in terms of my wealth, but I am disturbed at the fact that Aha did not pay me back. Compared to that, come to my home, I have an 11-year-old daughter, 1000 रुपये तो बहुत दूर की चीज़ है, वो 1 लाख भी गए ना, I would die to spend on her. Why? Because there is love over there, there is no love here. That has to be clear. So when we fail to have love for the akhirah, love for the deen, love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, love for the way of the prophet, तो फिर 10 रुपये खर्चना भी तकलीफ होती है. हम में से अक्सर जब सदका भी देते हैं ना, अपनी दुनिया की खुदगर्जी की वजह से देते हैं. To shut up a fakir, to make ourselves feel good spiritually, to sort of tell somebody at times, to sort of think कि चल यार मैंने सदका तो कर दिया ना. We don't do it for the greater purpose. इतने हम माल के हरीस हो चुके हुए हैं. And that has to be fixed, guys. That has to be fixed, right? So because money has become a commodity in of itself, it's not a means to an end. People essentially want money. How many of us want to have bank balances जिनको देख के हम मुस्कुराएं? That's the problem, right? What did the Prophet leave behind when he was leaving this world, right? You have to think. So none of that. So I'll just sort of, end with this notion that how much wealth is sufficient. That was the topic for the talk as well, right? कि कितना जो है ना माल वो sufficient है. There are many ways that we can answer this. The first is, ask yourself, who are you? It depends on who you are. Okay? How do you want to define yourself? So yeah, if you were the Usman Ghani of this ummah, we make dua that Allah blesses you with all the riches of the world. If you are the Abdurrahman bin Auf of this ummah, we make dua that Allah gives you so much कि आपसे हिसाब ना किया जाए. But if you are a bakhil, a miserly person, जिसकी कुल एक self-centered ज़िंदगी है, तो फिर इसका जवाब बहुत मुख्तलिफ होगा. तो सवाल ये नहीं है कि पैसा कितना होना चाहिए, सवाल ये है कि उस पैसे से करना क्या है. इस्लाम आपको अलाउ करता है अच्छी ज़िंदगी गुजारने के लिए, अच्छी गाड़ी चलाने के लिए, अच्छे घर में रहने के लिए, ये सब बातें आपको पता है. आप सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ने हर चीज़ में दर्जात और तबकात बता दिए. मुतवस्सित भी था, आला भी था, अदना भी था, ऑल ऑफ दैट वाज देयर. तो वो बहस ही नहीं है. ये हम नहीं कह रहे आपको कि आप फटे कपड़े पर पहन के जो है ना फिरना शुरू हो जाए. आप गुजारे जो ज़िंदगी, बट आप कौन हैं? जिस दिन आपने मसला ये है कि इस कमरे में लोगों को पता ही नहीं है वो कौन है. अभी तक वो सिर्फ सिटी बैंक के मैनेजर थे, अभी तक वो बस एक ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के सीईओ थे, फलाने बैंक में जो है ना फलानी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में वाइस प्रेसिडेंट थे. तो वो एक अलग रोल है. एंड लाइक स्टीफन कवी फेमसली सेज, the way you can identify is begin with the end in the mind. Think about it, who do you eventually want to be? Bring in the akhirah in the picture, right? And think about it, कि आप कौन, how do you want to, and then reverse engineer, right? Then reverse engineer. You want Jannah? Think about it, that how much money should be invested in the akhirah. वो अल्लाह ताला कुरान में सूरह बकरा में कह रहे हैं ना कि जब आप लेंडर के बारे में कि अगर तुम उसको सदका कर दो, कोई अगर शख्स मुश्किल में हो, इनकान ज़ू उसरत है, ठीक है, फ़नज़रतुन इलल मैसरा, ठीक है, कि उसको दे दो. लेकिन आगे के वअन तसद्दक़ू, कि मेरे बंदे अगर तुम सदका कर दो, खैरुल लकुम, ये तुम्हारे लिए बेहतर है, इन कुंतुम तालमून. एंड द लास्ट थिंग दैट आई विल सॉर्ट ऑफ से इज दिस, that this question, that how much wealth is sufficient for you, can also be responded by the fact that उतना माल काफ़ी होगा जितना आप अपनी कब्र में अपने साथ लेके जा सकते हैं. Whatever you can take to your grave will be sufficient, inshallah. So start building around that. Take your credit cards, take your cryptocurrencies, take everything around that. And if you know that that answer is not true, there's something that we have to change. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala याद रखें कि इंसान से कुर्बानी जो है ना, वो ऐसे नहीं लेते कि वो उसको आजमाइश में डालें. वो सिर्फ इंसान का दिल देख रहे होते. अल्लाह ताला आपको दुनिया भी दे सकते हैं, देंगे भी इंशाल्लाह, बट द क्वेश्चन इज़ व्हाट परसेंटेज कैन वी गिव बैक टू अल्लाह. जज़ाकुमुल्लाहु खैर. अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाहि व बरकातुहू.